Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the little delay. We had a meeting went a little late on us, so we had to get things set up. But we'll call the St. Croix County Board of Supervisors to order on June 4th, 5:04. And we'll have invocation by Mike Roeder from the Christ Center Assembly of God in Hudson. So everybody stand, please.
Thank you. Great to be here with you this evening. Romans 13 says everyone must submit to the governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. And these authorities are God's servants sent for your good. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we acknowledge you as our creator and provider tonight. Together, I want to say thank you for all your many blessings that you have provided us. Thank you for the freedoms that we enjoy in this country. The scriptures describe, God, how you have sovereignly established the governing authorities to promote peace, order, and justice. And so I want to thank you for every person in this room this evening. As we pause to also remember the Virginia Beach community and who suffered this senseless tragedy and shooting, and we just want to remember all the families and just the government community there as well. God, comfort them and surround them with your peace here tonight. God, today, would you grant us the wisdom to govern in the midst of conflicting interests and issues? God, grant us the clarity on important issues concerning our communities. Give us compassion regarding the true needs here, the ability to represent all members and communities. God, give us an heightened ability to work together in harmony even when there's honest disagreement. And may we recognize our responsibility to the past and to the future, to the rights, to the needs of both individuals and communities. And Lord, for the agenda that is set before us today, give us clarity and understanding of what would please you, what would benefit those who live and work in and around our beloved St. Croix Valley. Would you steer our intentions to align with your righteous will? We love you. We thank you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Will you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. We'll have roll call now. Thank you. Everyone's present, except for the two that we're filling these positions for. Thank you. At this time, we're open for public comment. Anything on or off the agenda? I have some, and we'll be restricting to 3 minutes tonight, so that's the length of time you'll get to talk when you're at the podium. And the first one I have here is Amanda Ingleslether.
Hi, good evening. I'm here to discuss the Zappa acquisition adjacent to the Eckerd Blufflands. That goes on later on your agenda. It was just heard in admin, so I apologize. I was hoping to make it to admin, but I couldn't get here in time. So I would have appreciated a smaller audience. So anyways, I just have a couple questions. I'm very interested in this piece. Seems to have just number one question I have is, why do we need these 2 acres, and why are they $345,000? Where has the appraisal or land value been assessed for these? We have 171 acres in that existing area, so I'm really struggling to understand the purpose. If you look in your packet, there is not any background information. So you're missing your who, what, where, why, how. So why? Why do we need this? Why does the county need to decide on these? Just why? In that area, I think it was about 3.9 million has been spent for those 171 acres. So you're looking at roughly $23,000 an acre. And here we're talking about $345,000 for 2 acres. And I can't process or figure out, based on the background information, why. This is a concern, regardless of if it's grant funds or taxpayer funds. So that's basically my number one question, is why that amount? There's no information in terms of value, how it was assessed. I mean, the others right in that exact area are, you know, like I said, roughly 23,000 an acre for 171 acres. We already have 171 acres there. What does the 2 acres gain us? So that's my question on that piece. And then the next piece falls into, okay, so we're gonna buy $345,000, we're gonna buy 2 acres from this gentleman. And then if, according to his letter, I just wanna read it, it's in your packet, but it says, once Starwood Outlot number 1 is approved as a buildable residential lot by all the government agencies, then I'll donate the money back. So this makes me very worried. This doesn't set up anybody in planning and zoning for proper planning work if someone can walk in and say, hey, if I get approval, then I'll donate you the $340,000. By nature of it being called an outlot, that typically means non-buildable. So the question also is, why is there not in the contract a requirement for the purchase and approval of a CSM, a certified survey map? None of those features are in that. It even says that, say he doesn't get approval, because this lot is in the Riverway. That's it?
That's it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Next person.
Point of order. I know you pronounced or gave your name, but what's the reason for you? Are you representing anybody? Or
I'm representing the taxpayers of St. Croix County, trying to
Okay.
understand why 2 acres is worth $345,000, and there's not enough information in the packet for anyone to understand. So I don't think now is the proper time to hit a 4 o'clock meeting approval and a 5 o'clock meeting for approval when there's no map in there and there's no clear understanding as to why.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next one is Darla Myers.
Darla Myers, 1098 Golden Oaks Lane in Hudson. I have before you a resolution for the Marinette County, Wisconsin Board, and it's in opposition to the legalization of recreational marijuana in Wisconsin. And I would like the St. Croix County Board to consider having the same resolution, whereas developing brains, especially those of babies in utero, children and teenagers, are especially susceptible to the harmful effects of marijuana. Although scientists are still learning about the effects of marijuana on the developing brain, studies show that marijuana use by mothers during pregnancy may be linked to problems with attention, memory, problem-solving skills, and behavior problems in their children. And whereas occasional use of marijuana has been shown to cause altered senses and altered sense of time, changes in mood, impaired body movement, impaired memory, and difficulty with thinking and problem solving. And whereas research has shown that marijuana's negative effects on attention, memory, and learning can last for days or weeks after the acute effects of the drug wear off, depending on the person's history with the drug. And whereas several studies have linked marijuana use to increased risk for psychiatric disorders, including psychosis, depression, anxiety, and substance use disorders. But whether and to what extent it actually causes these conditions is not always easy to determine. And whereas legal marijuana substantially increases the risk of impairment for those working in the manufacturing, construction, agriculture, and other business sectors, as evidenced by data showing employees who test positive for marijuana use had 55% more industrial accidents, 85% more injuries, and 75% greater absenteeism compared to those who tested negative. Now therefore be it resolved, the Marinette County Board of Supervisors opposes the legalization of recreational marijuana in the state of Wisconsin. Be it further resolved that the Marinette County Board of Supervisors directs the county clerk to forward a copy of this resolution to Governor Tony Evers, Department of Children and Family Secretary Emil Amundson, Department of Health Services Secretary Designate Andrea Palm, area legislators, and the Wisconsin Counties Association. The Marinette County Board did approve this, and I'm asking the St. Croix County Board to do the same. The template is here. All you have to do is copy it. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Challa?
Good evening, everybody. Great to see some familiar faces again. My name is Stephen Challa, and I farm with my family out in south of Hammond in Pleasant Valley Township. And I came to wish you a happy June Dairy Month. It's an excellent Wisconsin tradition. I brought you some cheese. You're welcome. We've got plenty of it to go around. I looked up the number, and here in St. Croix County, we produced 424 million pounds of milk 2016. That was the best county data I could find. So I'll do the math. That's 53 million gallons of milk. Or if you make it into cheese, as we pretty much do, that's 42.5 million pounds of cheese. So please help yourself. We're not running out. In the summer, we not only have June Dairy Month, there's several events that kind of mark and celebrate agriculture, and I'd love for you to attend some of those. Next week, I believe, June 11th, the fairly newly formed Western Wisconsin Conservation Council is going to host their first field day. And that may be a little bit more directed towards farmers, but they're making some pretty ambitious goals and strides towards water quality and soil quality advancements here in our communities. Later in July, we have the county fair. That's an excellent one to attend. Support all the 4-H and FFA kids and the projects that they've been working on already over the past months, and that comes together at the fair. And the last one, my personal favorite, is Farm City Day. That'll be August 10th, and if you're not familiar with Farm City Day, I'm going to give you the same intro I gave last year because there's so many new faces here. But Farm City Day was started years ago when a group of local farmers came together and realized that our community wasn't as rural as it used to be. That was almost 40 years ago. And it's just a tremendous opportunity to get on the farm, to see the animals, to see the crops, and enjoy some lunch and other games, activities, things like that. I'm especially excited for this year's event being hosted by the Minglewood Dairy and the Solom family. I'm going to let Kristen introduce more about the family, but and their new facility. But if you want to see and experience where agriculture is going and what the next generation is doing with technology, you got to be there. Their new facilities are really outstanding. Thank you very much. Happy June Dairy Month.
Thank you, Steve. Next one's Kristen Solom.
Well, good evening. As Steve said, I am Kristen Solom, and I'm representing the 5th generation on my family's dairy farm. We farm just actually a half mile into Polk County with a Deer Park address where today we milk 1,200 cows and farm 3,000 acres. But as Steve alluded to, we have a lot of technology that we're utilizing. So last summer, we underwent an expansion and we added milking robots to our farm. So we are milking 480 cows with 8 robot milkers today. So that's what we're really excited to open up our doors and share with all of you, and we really hope that you come and join us on August 10th to not only do that, but just to be with all the other thousands of people we are anticipating to join us. Instead of doing an open house this spring, we opted to host Farm City Days. So we're really excited and hope that all of you can join us on August 10th. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that has something to address on or off the agenda? Is there anyone else that needs to address something on or off the agenda? Last time, anyone else need to talk on something on or off the agenda? Thank you, everyone. We'll move forward with our consent agenda. I need a motion to approve that. Supervisor Coulter, second. Supervisor Peterson. Any discussion? Not seeing any discussion. We have a motion and a second up there, so we'll vote this time. That's all yeses. Thank you. Presentations and recognitions, nothing on that.
I think we have one, Mr. Chairman, update on the St. Croix County Comprehensive Zoning Project.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and board members. My name is John Hilgers, planner in community development. And we're here tonight to give you a brief update on our comprehensive revision to the zoning ordinance that we've been working on for about the last year and a half. Joining me tonight is Jason Valerius. Jason is with MSA Professional Services. They were the consultants chosen to assist the county in our project, and Jason will join in the presentation here in just a moment. As I mentioned, the project began in August of 2017. When the project started, there were primarily 3 goals with the update project.
Thank you, John.
Sorry about that.
The first goal of the project was to update our zoning code to make sure we were consistent with state law and legal standards. A couple of legislative sessions have led to some changes in state law regarding how counties and cities can regulate solar energy farms as well as wind turbines. There's also some new standards when it comes to conditional use permits. So our zoning code is changing to reflect some of the changes that happened at the state. Another purpose of our update project is to adjust the zoning districts and development standards to meet the very needs of the towns across the county. And as I'll show you in just a moment, we do have quite a diverse county, from the developing West End to our ag-centered towns in the west and the east, and we'll show some projections for growth here in just a moment for those areas. And lastly, we wanted to make our code easier for all users to understand and apply the ordinance. Right now, our existing code is a little bit cumbersome. We have the parts of the code that people use the most kind of towards the back of the code. So we're reorganizing the code, and we're also implementing a comprehensive use table, so you don't have to thumb through all the zoning districts to find the uses that are allowed. They'll be in one central location. This next graphic shows the state demographer projections for additional households out to the year 2040. And to get a better understanding of when we started talking with our towns across the county, we wanted to make sure we understood some of the growth that was anticipated to take place. So on the graphic you see on the screen, the darker the red, the higher growth town, and the lower growth towns are represented by the blue colors. So for example, the town that's going to grow the most, according to the state demographer, is the town of Somerset. They're projected to add about 842 households by the year 2040. Comparatively, 7 miles to the east is the town of Stanton, and they're projected to add 5 households by 2040. And that's primarily because of their agricultural status within the county. They have very strong policies in their comprehensive plan that supports agriculture, and they don't really see themselves growing to a large degree. If you take a look at the 4 towns in the northwesterly quarter of the county, Somerset, Star Prairie, Richmond, and St. Joseph, between those 4 towns, they will be adding about 2,550 units over the next 20 years. In total, across the entire county for towns that are under county zoning, the total added households will be 4,150. So between those 4 towns in the northwest part of the county, they'll represent about 62% of the unincorporated area's growth across the county. If you add the town of Hammond, which is in the middle of the county, they're projected to add almost 500 additional units. If you add that to the 4 towns I just mentioned, those 5 towns would represent about 75% of the future growth in the unincorporated areas. So I'm going to walk through the schedule and stakeholder engagement process. As I mentioned earlier, we started in August of 2017, and we've needed that time. We've had a very extensive public input process. And to start with that, we've had 42 meetings thus far. Some of our initial meetings were intended to solicit feedback and ask the basic question: what was working with our code and what was in need of review? We set up an advisory task force that was made up of rural landowners, business owners. We had town board reps as well as county board reps on that. We established a local development professional meeting where we met with some of our surveyors, our engineers, and our realtors to ask them for their feedback on what was working with our code and what was not. The Community Development Committee, which is charged with overseeing this project, we've had check-ins with them at numerous times throughout the process. County Board, we checked in with you in October 2017, and we're here tonight. We've had some prior correspondence with you earlier this spring to give you an update on where we're at in the project. We also had 2 public open houses that were very well attended in October of 2017 and December of 2018. And in November of 2018, we took some of that initial feedback and put together a first draft that we posted online from November until about the beginning of April. It's been taken off. We're now working on the public hearing draft based on the comments we received. And we also had a public online survey. People could go onto our website and offer comments that way. The second part of our public input process was very involved with our towns across the county. So when working with the towns, for ease of communicating our efforts, we divided the county into quadrants or clusters. And you can see on the overhead, we divided them basically in 4. The purpose of that was to make sure we were able to get out to those areas. We didn't have all the meetings in Hudson or at our Baldwin office. We took the time to go out into those districts or regions and meet at their town halls to go through some of our update process. So in summary, we have, of the 21 towns in the county, 17 are under county zoning. Throughout our public input process, we were able to meet with 16 of the 17 towns in our clusters or our regional meetings, and we had 3 such meetings. We had an initial one in September to identify issues that towns had concerns with. In April of 2018, we suggested some preliminary recommendations based on that feedback. And then in 2018, we established the draft of the code. After that, we set up individual meetings with the towns to meet with them and talk additionally about some of the standards that were being proposed, as well as working with the individual towns on their zoning maps, because there are areas of the county that will be changing zoning. And in all, we reviewed about 22,500 acres of property within the 17 towns. And you'll note on here, between Rush River and the town of Stanton, as we got through the cluster process, they felt there really wasn't a need to attend the individual town meetings, so we did not really schedule one with them. And then finally, in terms of working with the towns, ultimately, we are hoping to schedule a public hearing in July with our Community Development Committee. Once the county board gets this, and once the county board approves it, towns will have 12 months from the date of county board approval to opt in or approve county zoning so they're in it. We'll also be working additionally, kind of wrapping up the zoning maps. So by the time it gets to our Community Development Committee, we hope to have the zoning of all the towns pretty much put in place and ready to be approved. However, we are, given the number of parcels we have in the towns, and I should say it wasn't 22,500 acres, it was 22,500 parcels that are being reviewed with this update. We'll continue to work with the towns on that. Ultimately, we are going to have two zoning codes in place. For instance, towns will be adopting it fairly quickly after the county board adopts it. Those towns will be under the new code. For towns that take their time and are a little bit more methodical, they'll continue to be under the old code until that 12 months comes and goes. So staff, our zoning staff, will be actually implementing two different codes for those 12 months. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let Jason finish the presentation, and hopefully afterward we'll have a little bit of time for some questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So that was the some of the why and the how. I'm going to talk about the what a little bit, talk about the content of this revision. So first, the dominant themes, the things that we're trying to. Sorry. So Jason Valerius, planner with MSA Professional Services. I am the project manager for this project. Have been working with staff and all the stakeholders for the past year and a half. So the themes that we've been trying to address and things that have been coming up repeatedly in this process are largely about balance between various needs within the county. So across the county, finding a balance between rural homes and the desire to protect agricultural lands, addressing conflict between industrial agriculture and rural housing and the enjoyment of rural lands, addressing the different needs of the urbanizing towns versus the rural towns, which I think John kind of talked about a bit, in particular for commercial uses and the differing desires or expectations for regulation of commercial use in more urbanizing versus the rural towns. Enabling agricultural entertainment a little more readily. So a variety of uses that the county has been getting more requests for, including things like wedding barns or sites where you can come pick various types of crops and also do kind of touristy things. So enabling that a little bit beyond just ag lands specifically. And then more of a modernization thing, making the ordinance easier to use. So those are the themes of the big things we've been trying to achieve with this. The main thing that's not changing is the ag districts. So ag districts were updated just a few years ago, and we have been very consciously trying not to touch them or revise them because they were certified by the state, and I think everyone understands them, and we have been telling everyone that those are not changing. Things are moving around a bit in the code as we're reorganizing the code, but the policy content is not changing. So let's talk about what we are changing. We're creating 3 new residential districts. So you have the rural residential right now, and that comprises about 70% of the county. We are splitting that into 2 different categories, an R1 and an R2. Rural residential allows both agricultural use and residential use, and the R1 will emphasize the agriculture and be a little bit more restrictive with respect to residential use in terms of allowing fewer homes per acre in land that people have. The R2 will be as permissive as the current rural residential in regards to the ability to create new housing. Will be a little bit more restrictive with regard to agriculture, primarily in that it won't allow large animal feedlots the way that rural residential does everywhere right now. They're not as large. And then the R3 that we're creating is basically like the residence district, which hasn't really been used to date, but that would be used occasionally in the future in cases where there is either public sewer available or probably more likely a community septic system. So multiple attached units or higher density of residential units. So this is the draft map as of recently. Staff has been working with each of the towns to refine this map. You'll see that there's a dark yellow and a light yellow. The dark yellow is the R2, where the emphasis is on enabling a little more residential growth. The light yellow is the R1, where the emphasis is on protecting and continuing to allow the same degree of agricultural practice as is the case today. So you see more of the dark yellow near the highway and to the west, and the light yellow to the east. The greens and the blues, those are the eggs. So the green is the egg 1 and the blue is the egg 2. And those towns that have a lot of green and blue, they're not seeing much change because those districts aren't changing. There will be 3 new commercial districts. The C1 district is sort of a rural version of the current commercial in that it will not require paving in the way that the commercial district does right now, and it will have lesser expectation for landscaping. C3 is basically the existing commercial district. The C2 is a new commercial district that is narrowly focused on enabling agricultural tourism, rural tourism in instances that are not set up, that are not part of farmland preservation. 2 new industrial districts to enable a little bit more nuance between a heavy and a light. So a light industrial could be a variety of things from manufacturing to assembly, and just things that don't have any kind of noxious effects that they would generate. The heavy industrial, the I2, would allow for those heavier activities. There is a planned development district, which is sort of a negotiated zoning process that allows for some flexibility in cases where developers can show that there is a public purpose that's being served by getting some more flexibility. And then, as John mentioned, all the uses are set up in a table that describe and compare across each of the districts where a use is or isn't allowed and by what mechanism, whether it's a permitted use or a conditional use. We've got a little bit of language describing the process for how town recommendations are to be brought into the county's approval process. And then anything that pertains to a specific use, there are a number of regulations that are tied to specific uses, and those are described in a section for those use regulations. So a few highlights from that section. There are regulations now that allow for the keeping of chickens and ducks on smaller residential parcels, which is a pretty common thing today, really across the country, but right now isn't allowed on small residential parcels. There's a little bit more detailed regulation on fences and walls in a way that there hasn't been, and the draft allows it for up to 8-foot fences. Home occupations, major home occupations, have been regulated, and we're loosening that up a little bit in the draft to allow a greater portion of the home for business use, to allow a little bit more square footage, and to reduce the buffering distance between someone with a home occupation and their nearest neighbor. So that was one of the things we got feedback about, and we're trying to build in some flexibility. We spent a lot of time lately trying to refine the language around the definition and the regulation of junk to enable the county to get a handle on properties that really have gotten out of control with junk out in the yard. And there are several new regulations with regard to housing, including tiny homes, so very small homes, and those would be allowed only through that planned development district where the county would be able to kind of negotiate with and figure out exactly how that would work if someone wanted to do a series of those as part of a development. A few more commercial kennel standards are revised, looking to reduce what is currently a 300-foot setback from property lines down to 100 feet if there is fencing and berming, and some adjustments to the policies about when when animals, how many animals can be outside and during what hours, requiring a waste management plan, and current ordinance requires bark suppression collars, and we're taking that out. Short-term rentals has been an increasingly frequent topic here and elsewhere, and there are several existing regulations that pertain to short-term rentals, and so we have elected in this draft to refer to and those existing regulations both by the state and by the county. And then we do have some, again, in a similar theme, solar and wind energy systems are regulated by the state, and there are limits to how the local jurisdiction can regulate those, and so we have a bit of language in it. It is mostly about reflecting and making sure that people are complying with the state rules around those systems. Development standards, so these are standards that apply to all uses, all properties. Access management in driveways, we've built in just a little more flexibility for situations where it should be acceptable to have a second driveway. We have addressed the language in the current code regarding the conversion of private roads to public if a third parcel is added to that. We've backed off of that and left that to town regulation based on some case law regarding how counties are able to regulate the public improvements. Landscaping and tree preservation is addressed. The landscaping requirements refer to civic space, which is kind of granting some flexibility to count things like courtyards and rain gardens and walkways as part of landscaping. We tried to kind of clean up and consolidate and build in just a little more flexibility with those. Parking and loading, in particular the paving requirements, right now, so we're changing it so that paving, asphalt or concrete, is now required only in these districts, the R3, C3, I1, and I2. C4 there is a bit of a typo, but I should note that we had been working for a while. If you've been following this process, we had created a district called C4 that was specifically focused on the hamlets around the county, so those kind of remnant unincorporated hamlets, and after significant discussion and back and forth, we have decided that we weren't solving any problems by creating that separate district. Those are going to get simply the C3 zoning instead. And then in that C2, that agricultural tourism, we're allowing for grass parking. So that's the overview of what we consider to be the important topics that people should be familiar with and understand, and both John and I are available to answer questions that you may have about the process or about the content.
Supervisor Schoberg.
So the setback or the boundaries between homes for use now is going from 500 down to 100. So if my neighbor all of a sudden decided that they wanted to take up auto body repair and quite noisy, there's really, the county's going to just say, well, they're within their rights, or how is that?
So major home occupations are, which have, so the code has two categories of home occupation, major and minor. Minor are things that have no outward effect. They don't have customers. Generally, you wouldn't even notice, and those are unregulated in the sense that there's no permit required. Major, and that would be an example of a major, those are conditional use permits. And that means that the county does have an opportunity to evaluate whether a use would have an impact on a neighbor. So no, it's not just allowed by right and they get to do whatever they get to do. We're building in that flexibility to reduce it down to 100 feet, but the conditional use permit process also enables some opportunity to evaluate, well, what is the actual impact in this situation relative to where the neighbor is.
Supervisor Maddock.
What is the maximum that the Board of Adjustment could set for the safe separation for a major home occupation?
There's not a maximum distance set. And so I think that the reasonable conditions that would be applied would be requirements to, for example, have a use be entirely enclosed, and potentially also to set limits on hours of operation, volume, and any light that would be produced.
So the Board of Adjustment could require 500 feet from an applicant when it is justified by the nature of the business?
So there is opportunity, yes, to set conditions that would ensure that there is not a substantial negative impact to the neighbor. And so if the reasonable response is to, where there's the option to move it, to put it in a different location so that there's more distance, that would be a reasonable condition. Or perhaps it is some other approach to achieve, to mitigate the negative impact.
Changing to a slightly different topic, I'm very skeptical about the idea of loosening up the commercial dog kennel standards. Are the commercial dog kennels only allowed in places that have commercial zoning, one of the C1, 2, 3? Or are they allowed in residential or one of the residential categories?
I'm going to ask John to look that up while I'm talking. And while he's doing that, I'm going to note that the impact of the 300 feet is that to have a kennel, you really need an ideally proportioned 10 acres as a minimum, because 300 feet on a perfect square leaves you right in the center of that, of a 10-acre parcel. So it is quite restrictive, and the intent of the change was to enable that use to occur on smaller properties, but then in exchange to require better screening and buffering. Did you?
I also tell you that I'm very skeptical about going from the 2 dogs outside to the 10 dogs outside and eliminating the bark collar requirement in all instances. We're all informed by experience, you know, and I have sat through some applications and unhappy neighbors who were the victims. I'm sure they saw themselves of barking dogs, and so my attitudes are in part shaped by real experience. We've gone over the course of only the last few years from a 700-foot separation down to 500, and now it's proposed to go down to 100. And my initial feeling is that we're moving too rapidly, and that not taking advantage of the technology of bark collars is missing an opportunity to protect the neighbors, as it were.
So just to clarify, on some of the commercial kennel standards, in the R1 district, you can only have 2 animals outside at once. It's in the commercial districts and the ag district where you can have up to 10 outside. And then in terms of where commercial kennels are proposed to be allowed, they'd be permitted in the ag 1 and ag 2 district. They'd be a conditional use in the R1 district, and then they'd be permitted in all of the commercial districts, except C2.
Supervisor.
If any is going to be a problem, would be the potential for a 100-foot separation and no bark collars with 10 dogs outside in R1. Did I understand you correctly? That would be allowed under the proposal?
No, up to 2 dogs would be allowed outside in the R1 district
Okay.
at one time.
But the separation and the bark collar relaxation would also apply to R1, or would that
Yes.
only? Yeah, it would.
Yep.
Okay.
I'll note that the bark collar change is due to a belief that is not a humane approach, and so shouldn't be a part of the county ordinance.
Oh, did you get some scientific stuff on that? I've used bark collars on my dogs for decades, and it doesn't cause them any trauma. You have some scientific stuff on that, or is that kind of the feelings of some of your witnesses who testified?
It's based more on input than on public input than on studies.
Last question I have. What, if any, offers were made to the residents of Forest and Katy to see if they would like to participate in county zoning now?
So when we began this process, even in our very introductory meetings, we made sure we invited the other 4 towns not under county zoning. So that'd be Katy, Forest, the town of Hudson, and the town of Troy. And as a matter of fact, we kept in touch with them to the point where we sent them a link to our code online. They could access it. As a matter of fact, I've had a couple of calls from different supervisors from a couple of those towns just on background and wanting some information. So we have kept them in the loop through what we sent out to the other towns.
Supervisor Miller, did you have something you wanted to say? Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Supervisor Fosterling.
Yeah, I just had a question in terms of the 12-month county adoption, how that works. So if this is adopted, then there's 12 months for each municipality to opt in. Is that correct?
Yes.
And during that time, would they all have an option of essentially making up their own code and saying, we will take, the county code as it is, but then we'll make some slight tweaks to it? Is that possible?
That is possible.
Okay.
And in that situation, then they don't work with the county doesn't assist with the administration, they're on their own for administration.
Any other questions? Let's see. Thank you for a good report. We'll move on to annual reports. Health and Human Service Annual Report, Fred Johnson.
Thank you, Board Chair. And thank you, County Supervisors, for the opportunity to present the Health and Human Services 2018 Annual Report tonight. Before I cover anything in the report, I wanted to highlight a couple of things. A week ago today, I was in Madison, the 2019 Governor's Foster Care Award. We had John Brettel, who is one of our foster care coordinators, submitted Bill and Cindy Schlegel, who live in Spring Valley area, Baldwin, and they've been foster parents for 35 years, 34 of which were in St. Croix County. Have served hundreds of children, provide a lot of short-term care in emergent situations. So they were honored with 4 other families, received the Governor's Award, and it was my privilege to be part of that ceremony with them. So if you happen to know Bill and Cindy, or know somebody who knows them, certainly would extend your thanks to them. I'm sure would be appreciated. And then fast forward a week today, we had a visit from the governor's office, the governor at our office today. Did a tour of our St. Croix County Services Center, had an opportunity to speak with staff. All totaled, if you add up the numbers in our annual report, we have 237 staff within Health and Human Services. That includes the health center. Not all of them were there, but a good number were there. So excellent opportunity for the governor to hear from our staff and have an opportunity to interact and hear a little bit about what's going on in St. Croix County. After that, there was discussion about Medicaid expansion, which is an agenda item in front of the board this evening. In the annual report, you have a lot of data that is somewhat historical, but gives you current data. It also gives you good summary information about the programs we provide. So that information is there, and what I would ask is if there's questions or that you have, I'm available anytime to spend more detailed time going through. Certainly our program administrators would be happy to do the same, staff as well. I wanted to highlight just a couple of things in terms of goals that we've been working on and areas that there's issues in terms of access to service. One happens to be in our behavioral health division. You may have heard limited access for emergency detention, so we have been working with our hospital partners on emergency department telehealth. They're part of our certification. And one of the interesting things when Steve Kurt provided a little bit of a detailed review of the telehealth project to the Health and Human Services Board in May was that we aren't necessarily seeing a reduction in the number of emergency detentions, but what we are seeing is more voluntary detentions. And what does that mean? Well, that means that an individual that is experiencing a mental health crisis goes to a hospital voluntarily. They are, our law enforcement doesn't need to do the transport. They're not in the back of a squad car for safety reasons. Handcuffed often, and so it's a better scenario. So we're following that, and we're interested to just see where that takes us. It's been a great project, and I know Steve and his team are working hard on it along with our hospital partners. Children's Services, I gave a fair amount of detail about our Children's Services last year at the annual report. We've kept the Health and Human Services Board apprised of where we're at, and as a matter of fact, Ken Witt works some magic with the new ARP, and now we have a report that shows monthly where we're at in terms of expenses, so the board can keep on top of that without having to track through various detailed line items. At year end, we had 77 children in care. That's still high. But the good news is we had 48 children that were with relative placements. So relative caregivers are stepping up, providing care in the midst of our child welfare crisis, and for that we're certainly appreciative. One other goal that we had is to reach 100 consumers in our CCS program. That's Comprehensive Community Services. It's a growth program, one that we're seeing numbers increase, and more recent numbers in terms of service delivery look like they're in the 115 to 120 range. So that's an area that provides mental health services and substance abuse services for individuals across a large age spectrum. The final one goal that we didn't accomplish, but we continue to work on, is census in our community-based residential facilities. Census and payer mix in our nursing home is strong, has been. We're seeing increases in short-term rehabilitation, and we're seeing increases in our outpatient therapy. If you've been to the health center, it might be obvious as to why. We have a very nice facility, the pool, et cetera. Where our census has dipped is really in the two new CBRFs, the community-based residential facilities, the Kitty Rhodes Memorial Memory Care Center and the Orchard View Terrace. And why is that? That's because we still are waiting for home and community-based waiver heightened scrutiny approval. So the good news on that, while we aren't certified yet, the federal government, CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, provided feedback to the state of Wisconsin. So the process goes like this. Counties submit to the state, state reviews. If they approve, they submit to CMS. CMS has a final approval. So we are now through our first review with CMS. They provided feedback to the state. Sandy Hackenmuller, our nursing home administrator, health center campus administrator, received feedback the other day, a communication with our state partners. We'll be hopefully answering all the questions that the federal government has, and keep that process moving along. There's a lot of detail in the report. Again, if there's questions that you have at any time, I'd be happy to take time to answer those and spend time with you on our annual report. But you have a long agenda, so I'm going to keep it quick tonight. And thank you for your time. If there are any questions, again, I always make that with the caveat of only easy questions. So,
Supervisor Calder.
Yeah, Fred, I'm confused because on packet page 58 at the bottom is almost a footnote. It says that our forecast revenues, we forecasted in March of 2019. The 2018 report, unaudited, would show revenues to exceed expenses by $500,000 plus. And then, but then on page 72 of our agenda packet, in the column under Health and Human Services, in the third column, it shows our net income as a loss of $824,000 plus. I don't get why those numbers don't match. Maybe it's.
On packet page 72, I'm not sure where you're referring to.
That's of what?
Here, I can give you a copy. That's tonight's agenda packet.
I'm looking at it right here.
Well, maybe it came out different.
Did something get added to the packet that changed the pages?
Maybe Ken has to help.
Nobody's home.
So this document that you provided, and I just reviewed it with Ken, the 824,000 negative number is Health and Human Services. And so I believe that's made up of losses or, expenses exceeding revenue. And as I've talked with the Health and Human Services Board extensively, it's primarily in our purchase services for children. But I believe this also carries with it deficits that we would be applying fund balance. So in our comprehensive community services program, the way we're reimbursed about 70% of our costs in the calendar year. We get a reconciliation from a prior year, and that doesn't equal our current cost as the program's growing. So I think that's what makes up that number. I'd have to do a little bit more detailed review. The health center campus shows a net income of 575, so to the positive, which is close and consistent with what Beata had forecasted in terms of what we put in the annual report.
Any other questions?
Well, I still wonder why those numbers don't match.
Well, the $575,000 number doesn't match the $506,000 number because it was pre-audit. And I believe we identified that that would be an estimate. The $824,000 number that you mentioned as a negative, I'd have to go back and look. I just have seen this document for the first time, but I believe, and Ken can help me if I'm inaccurate, but I believe it's because we've applied fund balance and because we were exceeded primarily in our children's services, we had expenses over revenues. And if you take those together, I just need some time to take a look at that. But that would be my suspicion. And Ken is nodding affirmatively, but I just haven't had a chance to go through those.
So this footnote on page 5 of your report would be an error then? Because revenues didn't exceed expenses by that.
For the health center campuses, revenues did exceed. But again, that 500,
Campus only, okay.
the
This says the Health and Human Services Board, though. Okay, that's just the health center campus. Okay, that explains it.
okay.
Now I got it.
Anything else?
Supervisor Akharov.
Yeah, I have two. One is, I was on the committee when we were building the nursing home, and we were having problems getting approval from the state. And this has been like 3 years.
4, actually.
Is there an end? I mean, because there's other communities in the same situation. I mean, is anybody in the state helping us?
Absolutely.
But they're just moving really slow, huh?
So the holdup, I wouldn't say, is with our state partners. Our state partners have been helpful in the process of coming out and doing a review. So I believe the notes indicate in September of 2018, they did their site visits and they submitted to the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Service a recommendation that our facilities meet the burden of heightened scrutiny and are recommending that we be home and community-based waiver certified. So from September till just last week, we've been waiting for our CMS partners to respond. And I say 4 years because our initial submittal for heightened scrutiny was in May of 2015, I believe. And when we submitted at that time, the response back from the federal government was they cannot certify a facility until it is actually serving home and community-based waiver or citizens. So we've been waiting, and I'm hopeful. And
I think we're all hopeful.
yeah, we'll keep at it. That was one question, right?
Yeah, the other is on page 68. Just looking at it for the 2018 alcohol and drug abuse outpatient services wait lists. It's increased 50%. What's being done about that? I mean, these people can't wait.
So if you look at the average, it's increased, but we had wait list issues more towards the beginning of the year, and then they decreased towards the end of the year. Really what this has to do with, to a large degree, is when we have staff vacancies or staff are not available for whatever reason it might be. And one of the things we've talked about recently with the Health and Human Services Board is we not only have a wait list for services or treatment, we also have a wait list issue for our intoxicated driver program. So we're looking at how, and met with Judge Nordstrand, Steve Kurt and I did last Friday to review information that he had provided to the Health and Human Services Board. So we're looking at options, and we'll certainly work through the Health and Human Services Board to address concerns around wait lists. The one thing I would say is that since January, we've had a vacancy in our substance abuse counselors that has not been able to be filled.
Okay.
So we are not the only ones experiencing difficulty with filling those positions.
Yeah.
Our surrounding counties have expressed the same concern. And as a matter of fact, we are often doing direct mailings to those individuals in the state that we know are certified. So we're doing, I think, what we can, but you're right, that wait list time is a concern. And I'd like to see it
Okay, thanks.
much less.
President Hanson, go ahead.
There's a question which is, I think it ties in with what we're talking about with the jail. And you'd be the right guy to ask. The jail-based competency restoration program houses people who are on hold for a alcohol treatment or drug use abuse program treatment, and the system doesn't seem to have places for them to go for inpatient treatment. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? We are warehousing people who are waiting for treatment, adjudicated to be on hold for inpatient treatment and in jail, and now we're talking about bonding to renovate our jail so that we can accommodate that. What can we do in the human services realm to make that better? What do we need to do? What does the county board need to do to provide human services solutions to that problem?
I don't know that I'm going to have a quick answer for that. It's been an issue for bed space and availability at Mendota for quite some time, one of the institutes. I'm on a part of our professional association, I'm on a behavioral health policy advisory committee. And as part of that policy advisory committee, we've had conversations with the state about a bed need study. So about a year ago, the state issued or indicated that they were doing a bed need study at the institutes, meaning Winnebago, for emergency detentions, and at Mendota for competency eval, if I'm recalling it all correctly. Maybe 3 or 4 months ago, that report was released, and then it was pulled back. So I don't know when it will be re-released, but our policy advisory committee has been asking about that re-release, is because I think that speaks directly to the issue of the lack of resources or bed availability that isn't just an issue for our jail. I'm not well versed on it. Obviously, the sheriff would be able to speak in more detail, but I think this is an issue across the state. So that's one thing that I know is being looked at to increase capacity at those facilities. But I think it starts with that bed need study, and I don't know the exact reason as to why it was pulled back, and I don't know why that it has not been re-released, because that would be something that I think we could bring to the Health and Human Services Board, potentially back to the county board via a resolution saying yes. Certainly would talk about it with the sheriff as well.
So the study hasn't been done, is it, or hasn't been released?
Well, it was done. It was released. I had a chance to read it. And then I went back and it was pulled, and there was information exchanged about it as to they wanted to do some updates, but it was at least 2 or 3 months ago that process happened. And what I can tell you is every behavioral health policy advisory committee meeting that I'm at, I ask about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Our county administrator report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'll keep it very brief because we need to get into the business items of the agenda. In your packet, you have the financial reports for revenues and expenditures. Through the month of April 2019, all revenues and expenditures are within the threshold of 67%. Approximately, both for revenues and expenditures. We also have a updated report on the CIP project status through the end of April 2019. And then also some additional information we included in your packet this evening. This is a financial recap of 2018, and what I've tried to do, and with Ken Witt's assistance, we've provided fund balance for all the major funds within the accounting system, and so we've shown what the 2018 beginning fund balance was, and then also year-end 2018 fund balance. I'll note that these are all pre-audit, so they are subject to review and change by the audit. And so these are preliminary numbers, but fairly informative at this point. Along with the fund balance, pre-audit financial recap, I've shown some equalized value trends and estimates for the last 4 years, and then also a projection for 2020. I've shown some information regarding sales tax trends and estimate. On the second page, we've highlighted some information regarding the highway building project bond issuance. Made a note about the potential future sale of the highway facility in Hammond, which will be vacated this month. And then also, lastly, a note on the nursing home $1 million loan from the general fund, which was made in 2017. So just some additional information for the county board. And then I think we also showed some graphs pictorially of the fund balances, and then also what the policy is highlighted on the top of the graph. For each of those funds, the county board has established guidelines for those balances. For example, I won't go through all these, but for example, the general fund unassigned, the policy is 35%, plus or minus 3%. And then each fund has a separate guideline or policy established by the board. So that's just additional information in your packet. It might lend itself to some clarity regarding our discussion a little bit later this evening on the $8.4 million bond issuance for capital projects. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If there's no questions, we'll move on to our business items. And I've had a request to move 7 and 8 up to 2 and 3, and then move the rest of them down. If that's all right with the board, if they don't have a problem with that, we'll move that. I don't see anybody objecting to it, so we'll just change those 2 and move them up below 1. At this time, I'd ask if everybody needs a recess for a short time, or you want to get right into business items? We'll take a recess for 10 minutes, and we'll be back. Open session. Our first item on the business is the consideration of Health and Human Services Board position related to Medicaid expansion proposed. What?
You're going to move those other 2 up? We're going to do those underneath this first one.
They're 2 and 3.
Okay.
So, that's what I asked. Proposed in the 2019-21 state budget. You want to take that? So move. Got a motion. Do you need a second? Supervisor Schoberg, second that. Discussion.
Roger. Go ahead.
Is this the Medicaid expansion?
Yes. Go ahead, Bob.
I was just asking what we were talking about, the Medicaid expansion?
Just to let the supervisors know, this is a topic that came up at our last HHS board. It's one that it's a passion of the governor. I think it's, and Tammy said it very eloquently today in Hammond, or I'm sorry, in Richmond, and a couple of comments that you had made to start the meeting off when we sat down with the governor and that large group on there. So what was asked to do was to bring this resolution forward, see what the board wanted to do. We had 2 negative votes. The rest were all positive on it, moving this forward, and hopefully we can get this down to Madison. Tammy, I don't know if you want to say a few words on it, or Fred, if you want to come up.
Sure, I can say a few words. Well, if you read the information, you'll know that St. Croix County itself is set to receive $17 million in new investments as a result of the Medicaid expansion. And as we all know, because we've sat through many meetings and heard multiple problems that we've had due to a lack of funding, especially for Health and Human Services. And so some of the benefits that we would be getting would be increased, a boost to the pay for private care workers, personal care workers. So as we have talked through CNA shortage, this would be a good way to help solve that problem. And just, you know, when we look at the money that's going to be put into our county, it's hard to, how could you say no to this? It's going to improve the health of our community as a whole, so everyone benefits. And it's the fiscally responsible thing to do because a healthy community is more costly, less costly, as well as we have a better healthy workers, and so it just helps our economy as well. So I guess to me, when you read through the numbers, it really makes sense to be supportive of the Medicaid expansion.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Supervisor Schoberg?
I just want to echo and strongly support this resolution. I did a little research on this on the healthinsurance.org website. It talks about all the states in the union that have allowed for the expansion of Medicaid. And just this last year, Utah, Nebraska, and Idaho, not known as staunch liberal states, they've also joined on. So now Wisconsin stands alone with the likes of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee as being the types of states that kind of turn their backs on low-income people. So what this is aimed to do is to cover the low-income people at the difference between 100% of poverty and 138%. That's a difference between a person making $12,000 a year and $17,000 a year. That's most of the employees working part-time at Walmart. So they work at Walmart, the Walmart family makes billions, and all of our employees go without health insurance. This expansion in St. Croix County would allow 660 of our residents to have health insurance. They don't have it now. How many employees do we have in the county? Right around that. So it's as if we're saying no to every single employee for having health insurance. That's the number, 660. Think about it. They don't have health insurance. Throughout the state, it's more like 82,000. So even Kentucky, Indiana, Vice President Pence's home state, they have allowed it. The only reason this is not allowed here is political. It was the former governor's way of saying no to federal infringement on what the state should be doing. And right now, the state is paying a lot of money. In fact, over the last 4 years, we've paid $1 billion more for medical insurance here in this state because of our state's support for the lower income people. So we're this is a $1 billion mistake so far. So not only do we fix that, but we also have to suffer for the fact that $1 billion has been lost forever. So again, to any of my colleagues here that vote against this, I'm questioning your politics and your American values.
Supervisor Hanson.
Well, I'll take a different tone but a similar stand. We pay federal taxes, each one of us do, and that money is going into that pot, and that pot's getting divided and paid out to the states. And yeah, Mitch McConnell's letting it flow back to Kentucky. He's not insisting on an ideological stand. He's happier than heck that we're making that our hill to die on. So you're welcome, Mitch McConnell. We're going to make that ideological stand so that people can say, see, not everybody's taking that Medicaid money. I think we should take this because we've already paid for it. It's coming straight out of our pockets anyway. We should accept this for the state and for the people who need it.
Supervisor Tatum.
Well, I'd just like to add a few comments in that. When we think of those 660 people, I work with the elderly and disabled, and really a lot of those people are elderly people. that would stand to benefit from the Medicaid expansion. People who currently can't afford medications, people who really are not getting the health coverage that they need. And again, I work in the healthcare industry with these people, and you know, it's people are in dire conditions and are hurting in our county. This is $17 million that will come into our county that we don't have to ask our taxpayers to come up with more tax money for. It's the money is there. All we need to do is accept it.
There's no further questions. Will Supervisor?
Just a comment. This is a very difficult question. I think it's one of the most difficult we have looked at in any way. And one question I would just have, why are we looking at it? I guess we're sending a message to Madison that it's the feeling of this county one way or the other in this position. And I guess that's fair enough, but it is a state issue. It's not a directly county issue, although there's benefits perhaps to St. Croix County. I would just say that in my research on it, again, it's very, very difficult. And I think what Supervisor Schoberg said was correct in many ways, but I wouldn't challenge people's American values and politics if they vote no. I think the Joint Finance Committee down in Madison yesterday rejected this. Now, it's a Republican-controlled Joint Finance Committee. They rejected it. I think the vote was 12-4, but I'm not sure. It's been the subject of debate for years. There is a very substantial study done by a major Wisconsin think tank that says this will cost Wisconsin taxpayers $600 million a year. It'll cost every individual in Wisconsin $177 more in expanded health care costs. And there's a whole ream of data that shows that various things will happen. Health care costs will go up because the increased number of people on Medicaid will, because it's no cost to them, will take advantage of all the services that they would get. And, you know, and in a way we want them to, if it's preventive. But if they're going to use the emergency room for very minor things, or if they're making overuse of their pharmacological services, pharmaceutical services, or other things that aren't necessarily needed to have a better health care result, which is very much in question whether in those states that have expanded it there is a better health care result, then I would just say reasonable people can differ on this, and American values should not be called into question, because those people in your districts that are now paying their health insurance are going to pay more. They're going to pay more. And a lot of those are middle-class people who are earning $40,000 a year. And they're going to say, this hurts to pay this extra amount of money. So there's winners and there's losers in this thing. It didn't come out of the sky. It's not, Santa Claus didn't create this. So, and this is also just a kind of a difficult issue for a lot of us to debate. The Health and Human Services Board has presumably had testimony on it, looked at it, reviewed it, considered it for weeks and months, if not years. Many of the rest of us, this is the first time it comes up for serious consideration. So I just think it's, again, fine comments have been made, but also I think we have the least insurance gap of any state in America, I think, for the people in that range, 100 to 138% of the poverty level. Half of those people are probably covered, that Supervisor Schoberg mentioned, by their Walmart insurance. They're not making much money, but they're covered by a private insurer. And we subsidize so much medical care in Wisconsin, I suspect that 90% of the other half is covered by subsidized insurance. Now, I'm not an expert in this, so I've been around a little bit, but it's not black and white is what I'm saying. And again, I wouldn't call our values into consideration on this issue.
Any other discussion? Otherwise,
I apologize for that comment, but I also have my facts in front of me that I presented. I question your facts.
let's not get into a debate over that. I think we'll get into a vote on it now. If anybody has any problem with that, we'll just vote now. Thank you. Four noes, the rest yeses, so that passes. Thank you. Next one we're going to move is 7 will move up to 2, so initial resolution authorizing the insurance of a $8,425,000 general obligation bond or promissory notes. I need a motion from Supervisor Peterson. I need a second. Supervisor Dawson, second. Open for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, just a very, very brief comment. This is a resolution that comes in front of you. Actually, it was in front of you last month. It came to you last month from the Administration Committee and the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee, both with affirmative votes for recommendation for approval. It came up at our last month's county board meeting, and it was referred back to the Administration Committee and the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee. Both committees took this issue up again, and both affirmatively have brought the very identical resolution back to the county board for your consideration this evening. As a refresher, very, very quick refresher, this is a resolution authorizing the issuance of $8.4 million in government obligation bonds financed for a period of 20 years to fund an improvement in the jail to equip 10 special needs cells. Second, it includes the mechanical and HVAC, which is the air and mechanical for the jail and the government center. And then lastly, funding to replace the 20-year-old emergency communications vehicle. Those are the 3 projects that are included in the funding and come before you from the Administration Committee and the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee with a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
And when this came back to us, I asked Protection to come up with some options looking at the van. And after hearing their presentation, myself, as well as I'm speaking for most of the committee, realized there really probably weren't any good options. So ultimately, I feel probably the rest of my committee support this resolution.
Well, I agree with everything in it, and I agree everything is necessary and needed and vital. I have a problem because for years we've been talking about the fact that we may need another courtroom pretty soon. And now we're in the situation with the youth not having a place to put them. It seems like this is a much broader situation that should be looked at to see if there's possibly, and I hate to prolong it, but it's like we're looking at it through a narrow image with blinders on and not looking at the whole thing and seeing what can we do that might take care of multiple problems beyond the problems that I agree are needed in this, but it's like, can we do something else that would help a wider range of needs?
Supervisor Hanson.
I see several reasons to doubt that this is a good plan. I don't see that it's been demonstrated that there's a clear need for this magnitude of an investment. I went back and I looked at the Sheriff's Department annual report in 2018. And the one thing that I found about mental health at all says that they continue to see a rise in those inmates suffering from a mental health crisis. It's a personal crisis, not a crisis in the jail. And they said that they have 20 hours per week budgeted for a specialist, and they said they would like to increase that number of hours. So they're talking about increasing less than a full-time equivalency. They didn't say to what, but they want presumably to adjust that up maybe to a full-time equivalency. That's not $6 million. So we don't see a raging crisis in this report, which was given less than a year ago. I agree that there's a crisis. I agree there's a problem, but I don't see it rising to this level that quickly. What I believe we should do is probably something different, maybe have a much more thorough report, maybe have a report come from a much more thoroughly researched process that would result in a needs analysis. I believe that we should follow. I had sent to each of you, although I couldn't commit a walking quorum by discussing it with everybody, I sent the report, the community and economic impacts of the St. Croix River crossing, which was sent to each of us in 2015. This is an incredible piece of work that was done by University Extension and by the University at River Falls. And in it, you'll find in several places, but one of the clearest is in the key findings number 6, which talks about government services needing to be increased over the next 25 years. And as we plan for growth, we need to plan for growth on the long haul. And I see spending this money as premature. Perhaps we're going to need to have a new jail, and how do we know? I've heard it said many times that this will fix the problem for years to come. How many years? For how many people? For what problem? We need to do a needs analysis to bring in a specialized firm that knows how to do this, to work with our sheriff, and to do a detailed needs analysis before we pull the trigger, not pull the trigger before we aim at the right target. And so I'm going to ask you, if you have any shred of doubt about spending these millions and millions of dollars, vote no on this, and let's regroup and take our time and do this right. Thank you.
Supervisor Peterson, you want to say something?
I guess I would respectfully disagree with my colleague. We have personnel in our jail that have been attacked by prisoners. We only have so much money to work with, and it would be nice to sit for another year and look and study and wait for interest rates to go up and come back and then look at it again. A horrible analogy, but I think Nero may have had the same idea about Rome, and we know what happened there. So I would not, I'll vote for this.
Any other discussion, questions? Supervisor Coulter.
Yeah, well, last month we voted 12-5 to send this back to the committees. I think it's pretty preponderance of opinion, maybe some minds have changed, that we wanted something different. I have 2 objections to it. I remain unconvinced that we even need this emergency communication van. The second thing is that I don't like having the non-callable debt on all the things, on all the debt, when we have some windfalls, obviously, in our near future. In terms of the proceeds from the sale of the old county highway building, and also the nice job that our highway department and Ravi have done on keeping us under budget on the new construction. I have one question about that too, Pat, and thanks for putting this nice report, this recap in the packet. But we got $700,000 reimbursement from the state of Wisconsin for the salt shed at the new highway building. Where does that $700,000 show up? Did that go into a different fund, or does that show up in the cost savings on the building?
Robbie or Ken, do you want to speak to that?
At this point, we have a commitment from the state. I have an email from the Northwest Region Maintenance Manager that they are committed to the project. We haven't received the funding yet, and I haven't signed the official letter. So until I do, I have been hesitant with WSDOT to count any dollars, but they have committed to it, but that would come in the care of St. Croix County. It's, that check is directed towards St. Croix County. I guess that would be what we requested of them at the time we made the request in the SELCHA.
So to answer your other question, Supervisor Coulter, the callable debt, there will be debt that's callable coming up, and we've tried to show that in the reports. So when and if the highway property sells in Hammond, or if there is savings from the highway construction of the new facility, which there will be savings, those proceeds from that sale, the residual balance in the highway construction budget, if the board so chooses to apply those funds, those sources of revenue towards retiring debt that is callable within the next few years at a higher interest rate than what these bonds most likely will be issued for, the board can do that. And so I think that if it will accomplish the goal that you're speaking to, the board can, if it so chooses at a future date, retire some debt that will become callable within the next few years. To answer Supervisor Achterhoff or Hansen's question, I think we have studied this issue. We've studied it to death. And the sheriff and the chief deputy are here. They are the experts. They work in that jail day in and day out. They experience the transportation of prisoners back and forth from holding cells to the regular cells. We've had jailers injured. We've had inmates injured because of this. I don't like to use the word crisis in the jail, but it's a very, very serious situation. We've studied it. I listened to the sheriff, I listened to the chief deputy and the captain and the jail captain when they speak to me about this issue. And so it's been in front of us for months now. It should not be a new issue. You've had 2 of your standing committees look at this issue month after month, and they've come back to you with an affirmative recommendation to proceed. That's 10 of your board members. There's been a lot of debate and a lot of discussion and a lot of good questions. The issue of the communication van. I have said this repeatedly, that if there is opposition to that component of the project, then take it out. It's not an issue that's going to go away. It's been something that Steve Takash and his predecessor from years ago have been pointing out to me year after year that this vehicle needs to be replaced. We're continually pouring more money into it to keep it on the road. If all of you watched the news over this past weekend, which I'm sure we all did, we saw the tragedy at Virginia Beach. Of all the pictures that I saw flashing across my TV screen was a picture of the emergency communication vehicle that was called out to that scene. Now, if we have an incident, God forbid, anything like that, or any emergency, this evening I thought, based on some of the emergency weather reports I was getting from our emergency management office, that vehicle probably, I thought, very likely could have been called out this evening if we would have had worse weather than what was being predicted. My point is that even if that vehicle only goes out occasionally, when it's needed in a crisis, it's on the road. It becomes our communication center. And so I don't know, in good conscience, as your county administrator, I can't say no to a request like that. Repeatedly, year after year, that has come through. And I listen to the sheriff and our staff. And so I don't know what else. If the board so chooses to delay this or defeat it, then, you know, we go back to the drawing board. But I would urge and recommend your support. Thank you.
Supervisor Motatum.
Well, I would recommend separating out the command vehicle from the jail. Why aren't we doing that?
It's up to the board. It's all one project. If the board wants to separate that,
I would
they
make
can.
that motion to separate those two.
You got to make a motion to amend.
That's why I'm making a motion to amend that, to separate out the command vehicle from the jail funding.
And do I have a second to that? Supervisor Coulter, second that. Now it's open for discussion. Supervisor Schoberg.
I'd like to speak against the amendment. The reason being is at our last board meeting, I was one of the people that said I'd like to refer this back to the committees. The reason I did that is that at the last board meeting, it seemed like everybody was there to make the presentation and it's signed here, and it was a little bit too quick for me. So I needed another month to study it, and you all granted that to the administration committee and to public protection. Everybody, we took it back under advisement. During that period of time, I watched the videos of both of the committees. I read more information. It was very valuable additional input that came through. So I'm convinced that sooner or later, that van's got to be replaced. It's got rust. Did you look at the pictures, folks? If you buy anything used, it's still going to cost $250,000, still going to have to be retrofitted. So let's take care of it. It's 20 years old. Let's take care of it. So I'd like to keep this together. Just let's vote on the whole package first, and if that fails, then maybe we can have a motion to reconsider and take it out. I'd just as soon vote against that amendment. Thank you.
Supervisor Fiedler.
I just want to associate myself 100% with Supervisor Schoberg's remarks. And just add that Andy Brinkman, who's not with us, but chairs the PPJ committee, made an interesting comment when we considered it, and he said it's insurance. And that vehicle doesn't go out too often, but when it does, it's really important and stays for many, many hours, sometimes in very inclement weather, in terrifically difficult situations. And the cost in this bond proposal for that vehicle, given the demographics that we were exposed to earlier about our growth of our county, in round numbers, it'll cost everybody in our county between $0.25 and 28 cents a year for the next 20 years to have a new command vehicle. And it is really needed when it's needed. And so I just agree with Supervisor Schoberg's comments.
Supervisor Motatum.
Well, I actually, I feel like we do need a new command vehicle. I have an issue with some of the jail, along with Supervisor Hanson, in feeling that we need a little more expertise, I guess, in longitudinal study of the need. If I'm looking at, I'll give an example of my children. There was a study done for a new school. And if they're looking at a new school, they're not going to ask the principal if a new school is needed and it's going to serve the community well for the next 20, 25 years. They hire in experts who look at the needs of the community. And so I agree we need the command vehicle. I wish it was separate out from the jail. I guess that's my point.
Anybody else with a comment? Supervisor Osnes.
I guess it's either for Pat or Steve Takash maybe. If we would pull this out and not use bonding money, is there cash ready available to purchase a van? Just plain and simple. Do we have the money to do that? And I'm wondering if that would be easier for supervisors if we paid for it in cash versus bonding for it, or do you want to eliminate, it's an option rather than eliminating the comp van altogether?
If the board wanted to draw down your reserves to pay for the vehicle replacement with general fund reserves, it's the call of the board. I would not recommend that. Like I said before, if the board wants to retire debt early, you're going to have that opportunity very shortly as some of the prior debt issuances become callable. And so, and if at that point you want to apply those proceeds from the land sale or other fund balances, you can do that.
Point of order, how does that apply to the amendment?
So if there's other discussion, there's an amendment on the motion for an amendment on the floor to drop the command vehicle out. Second. So at this time,
What's the value?
Supervisor
If we're dropping out the emergency vehicle, but is that still going to be part of something else, or that's just totally gone? Because I would vote for a new emergency vehicle, but I don't know about the other things. Not that I don't feel that they're important, but there's so many other things involved with them that we could do combined. But I think the emergency vehicle is extremely important because, boy, when you need it, you need it.
Supervisor Peterson.
I think Supervisor Solberg made the statement, I think that's correct, that if we turn this down and we vote on the other one, then, and it fails, then possibly the emergency vehicle could be brought back, or the jail, or whatever. But I think we could sit here and probably discuss off and on all night, and so I'm going to vote against the amendment, and hopefully we vote on the whole issue, and then we can go from there.
Okay, Supervisor, okay. Any other discussion before we vote on this amendment?
Let's be clear about what the amendment is. It's a dollar amount, correct? It's a dollar amount.
Right.
And what's the value, what's the funding for the emergency van? That has to be, that's the amendment to the resolution.
$389,000.
Brian, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you. Brian Riley with Ellers, financial advisors to the county. Absent the emergency vehicle, the size of the bond issue, so that would be the Justice Center and improvements to the government center, would be $8,025,000 in total.
Okay, so it's $400,000 for that.
Correct.
Command vehicle. Okay. So does everybody understand that's what the amendment is going to do, is drop out that $425,000 or $400,000 off that resolution. So if everybody's ready to vote, and a yes vote is for the amendment, and no is drop the amendment off.
But where does that leave the emergency vehicle? It's gone?
Well,
No.
it's subject to another action by the board at a future date.
Yep.
Could it also be done today?
I don't see how that's possible.
It's not gonna
Well,
be
it's a
done
part
today.
of the whole package.
It
To
is.
take a piece out of the package, it's still consistent with the open meeting law.
But
What are you
the
thinking?
notice was for a resolution authorizing the issuance of $8,425,000 general obligation bonds. There's nothing in the open meetings notice about any other funding options for a ban. I don't see it in the meeting notice.
Supervisor Tatum.
So can I withdraw the amendment?
Not now.
No, okay.
No, it's already voted, ready to vote, so. Okay, if there's no more discussion, we're going to vote. And that fails. So now we're going back to the original resolution for $8,425,000. There's a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any other discussion on that? Supervisor Schoberg.
I have to believe that our county staff, our county administrator, who we entrust to do the heavy lifting, we're the policymakers here. They've spent a lot of time with the Sheriff's Department. I did a lot of research on this too. You know, back in 2016, someone forecast that to build a special needs cells for the jail, this is the 2016 CIP report, in the year 2020, we'd have to spend $369,000. So that was off. I don't know what you would have got for is that deal still available? I wish it was, but it's not. So the new study is, and we saw the pictures. I think I have to go ahead with this, with all due respect to my colleagues who are more reticent about it, and just have faith and confidence in the integrity of our professionals or of our staff and the advisors that they've counseled with, and know that we have a crisis here. Know that a fellow inmate could be seriously harmed, and if that happens, there's lawyers out there are looking for that. This county was sued before by wrongdoings at the jail. And if we have malfeasance there again, was that a $5 million, $8 million hit? A lot of it was covered by insurance, but how embarrassing. I don't want that to happen again, so that's why I'm going to support this.
Okay. No further discussion. This, because of the 2 vacancies on the board, if we vote on this, it takes 13 out of the group tonight to pass this. So just so you're aware of that. So this time we'll vote. No. 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 12 and 4, so that fails. Right?
Fails.
It fails. We'll go down to the next budget item, which is the budget amendment for 2019-2. I have a motion. Mr. Razza's motion. Second?
Well, it fails, so.
What? It failed.
Well, if so there is a way to handle the van if you want to do it through the budget amendment. You'd have to be creative in re-engineering the budget amendment.
So can we technically move forward and bring the budget amendment back at the next meeting, Scott?
This budget amendment contemplated the passage of the $8.4 million in bonding, and so then it just adjusted appropriate accounts within the budget to accommodate that 8.4 million. So my recommendation to the board is that this budget amendment is no longer necessary based on the action that you just took. So it can either be withdrawn by a member or defeated. It's no longer necessary, in other words.
But you could strike and add different accounts if you wanted to do the emergency command vehicle. Or you could reconsider your options at a later date.
Wait a minute.
I think the chairman could make a ruling, which probably none of us would challenge. He could make a ruling that it's now mooted, and we'll go on to the next order of business.
Well, if it's no longer needed, it's no longer necessary for us to vote on it. So we can move on to the next business item then. So Supervisor.
Mr. Chairman, just to make an observation, we are missing 2 members of the board permanently at this point, and we're missing a member of the board temporarily, who I know as a member of the administration committee voted for this package. So if you were to bring this amendment up at a later date, it very likely would have 13 votes.
Okay. We'll move forward. Yep. So we'll move up to our resolution to file a request for waiver from the state mandate pursuant to section 66.0143, mandate to provide audit reports concerning health and human services, purchase of care and services contracts under section 46036 and 49.34. I have a motion to move that forward. Oh my, Supervisor Coulter, motion. Do I have a second? Supervisor Motato, I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on that? Do we have some input on that?
No comment, Mr. Chair.
No comment on that?
No.
Okay. Any other comment on that? We have a motion and a second. I don't see any. We'll vote on that resolution. Go. Oh. We have to vote again? Yeah. Okay, we'll vote again.
Voting again?
Yes. Because,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's all yeses. Thank you. That passes. Next resolution for participation in the WDNR Municipal Dam Project and support for a joint municipal dam grant application for the Willow River Lower Power Dam. I have a motion. Supervisor Coulter, do I have a second? Supervisor Motatum, is there any discussion on that dam project? Excuse me, the water flow over the dam. No, that's what it is. So if everybody's aware of that, we'll move forward. No discussion. It's time to vote. And that's all yeses. Thank you. Our next resolution is to purchase real property, deed restriction easements, and grant easements, Eckerd Bluffland County Park. So, need a motion. Supervisor Peterson, Supervisor Hanson seconds that, right? Discussion on that.
This resolution is in front of you from the Community Development Department, and Ellen Denzer is here if there are any specific questions.
Is there any questions? Does everybody know what they're voting on?
Question, Mr. Chairman. Is this what our earlier speaker spoke to on this resolution?
Yes. Sure.
I have a personal request regarding recusal from dealing with this question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cox, have you a different opinion than you had a few minutes ago?
No, I think,
So I think
I'll give you the option of either I can say it in the room or outside, but
No, if you haven't changed your opinion, I would request permission to withdraw from the room and not participate in this decision because of the fact that it appears on its face that there may be a subsequent matter that comes before the Board of Adjustment.
Yes.
And if I have participated in some way or been informed as a result of what goes on here, I think that might disqualify me from dealing with it there. And the same principle would apply to Mr. Peterson.
Same for Supervisor Peterson, too.
So, you know, if you would permit us, I think we would wait outside in the hall until somebody comes and tells us you're finished with it.
That'd be fine.
Would that'd be
Sure.
okay with what, how you see this, Mr. Cox?
Yeah.
There'll still be more than a quorum here and so on.
500 feet.
And gotta wear a no bark collar. Yeah.
Is that all right, going to go out there?
With no objection, could there be a different movement of the resolution? Because I think Mr. Peterson made the motion.
So, yeah, with no objection, somebody else should move
So you move no objection?
No, there's no objection.
No objection, so we can move forward with our vote then? What?
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, okay.
Did you just go to a final vote on the resolution? You were just changing people that moved on that, weren't you?
Right.
Right,
Yeah, so really, I think we should open it up to discussion.
right. We'll open it for discussion. We have a motion and a second on the floor, so now we'll open it for discussion. Supervisor Arkaroff.
Can I have Ms. Denzer come up and explain to us, especially, because on this committee, I certainly had qualms thinking that amount of money for 2 acres was just crazy, but it got explained to us.
Thank you. Is that all right? Thank you very much for having me. So I have a presentation, and hopefully it will answer your questions, plus I have a little extra information in regard to the comments at the beginning of the meeting. So this, for those of you who might be, I will go through all of it. For those of you who might be new to this, the St. Croix River Crossing project, the new bridge over the St. Croix, involved several mitigation items, mitigation agreements between various agencies, Minnesota Department of Transportation, Wisconsin DNR, the town of St. Joseph, also St. Croix River Basin Team, and St. Croix County. One of those agreements was that St. Croix County received $2 million towards acquisition of lands that would be replacement lands for the impact on the bluff line from the new bridge on the St. Croix River. We also received $400,000 towards green space activities, and you'll get a complete summary of that in a few seconds. There were some key funding criteria, one of which was we had to have a willing seller. It had to have, again, replacement lands or in close proximity or have an impact related to the bridge and the bridge's impact on the river. And we also added some decision points related to what St. Croix County felt was important, and those included things like the funding purpose and availability, the location, water quality opportunity to protect and improve it, scenic preservation, recreational opportunity, and things related to if it was adjacent to an existing county park, that kind of thing. So what we have done in some of the purchases we have done, is we have acquired what we are now calling Eckerd Blufflands on the St. Croix River. This part of the property was acquired and purchased from C.A. Richards and his wife, and this part of the property was acquired from the Eckerd family. Actually, just last summer in July, we completed that acquisition. So that is shaded in green and outlined in green. And then what we are talking about tonight is this property right here. This is the Zappa property. Adjacent to the Zappa property, and just for your reference, is outlined in blue, is what is called the Starwood Conservancy area. Starwood is a subdivision that was developed, it's right down here in this vicinity, that was developed back around 1999 to 2001. 2000, mostly it was completed. And that subdivision created this conservancy area, and it's owned by both the Homeowners Association and the West Wisconsin Land Trust. So this is a what we would call a hillshade map created through our LiDAR that shows the topography on this property and this adjacent property. And as you can see, it's very, very steep bluff lines along here. Also has a secondary bluff line on certain portions, very steep ravines on much of the property. You can see that this conservancy area consisted of a huge ravine system that actually extends onto the county property, the Eckert property, and it is partially on this property that we're going to be discussing tonight. So looking at this more closely, one of the comments that was made earlier is, why are we spending so much money on 2 acres? Well, this is not a 2-acre purchase. There's a lot more parts to this. There are actually 5 parts to this project. And part of the reason we never got an appraisal on it, there's really 2 reasons, but part of it is that it was never, will you buy 2 acres from me? That was never it. It was either the whole 5-part package or really not at all. The way that it was presented and requested that we look at it. So the property owner, Mr. Zappa, actually owns right now everything in red, what's in green, and what's dashed also in green. These 3 pieces, this is a piece of property about 6.74, almost 7 acres, that we would be purchasing a deed restriction on it. That deed restriction would limit future development of that parcel to only 1 residential site. Next to it is the 2 acres that we would purchase outright and add to the county park, and then adjacent to it again is, in green, is a utility and access easement that crosses the Starwood Conservancy area and was originally retained by Mr. Zappa, who was a partner in the development of the Starwood property, in hopes that that might someday be an access for him to access his property. He has owned this piece in green and red and this since about 2000. So he spent 20 years hoping to find a way to develop a home or homes on this property here. And basically nothing's come to fruition. This hasn't worked out because from here there's another property owner, and I believe that is shown better on the next slide that I'll show you. This never provided him with additional access. He also approached the Eckert family that we brought this land from several times and requested an easement, but was never, they never would agree to sell to him. So he never was able to get that. So basically we're looking at these parcels and what we would do. So in addition, what we would be selling to Mr. Zappa is an easement. This is, I had this asked earlier, so this is State Highway 35, and this down here is Old Highway 35, which is now a town road. Right now, there is on the Eckert property which we own, there are 4 houses here, and those people live there and have very nice properties on the St. Croix. What's in front of their homes is a 66-foot wide public easement, or easement that was dedicated to the public and looks very much like a public road because it meets all the standards and was dedicated to the town at the time they subdivided the first 3 lots. However, the town has never maintained this or taken care of it because they don't have access to it. This, which also looks like, if you're out there, a public road because it is blacktop, is actually not a public road. It's only a 33-foot wide easement, it's substandard, and the town never accepted it as a public road. That easement continues all the way down, and at this point it's all gravel, and it continues all the way down because this is another property owner who lives right partially within the county park property. And so that goes to here. So what we would be proposing to sell to Mr. Zappa is basically an easement that crosses the existing easement, all 33 feet wide, and then adds to it this much additional to get him down to his property. So some of the advantages about this access is that it adjoins the new county park. It provides an additional 2 acres to add to the county park land. It adjoins the Starwood Conservancy area, which is a very large, very nice conservancy area, very well protected. This would protect about 500 feet of bluff lines, some scenic vistas, natural habitat, and forests, which you could see on that topography map that showed very well all the bluff line involved. It also provides additional recreational opportunities. One of the nice things about this parcel that we would be getting is that it has some very beautiful views, very good opportunities for people. there's a little piece down here also, and I will just point out too that the other piece, so I said there's 5 parts, is that we would also be purchasing an easement right in this vicinity to get us into this half of our 2 acres we would be purchasing. This ravine is pretty steep and hard to get through. So the county can easily get down to this through the land we own, to this portion of the 2 acres. But on this side, it's a little tougher. It's pretty steep in here, and we would only be able to get down there and avoid all the rules regarding steep slopes in the riverway if we were to come down and cross over through Mr. Zappa's piece that he's retaining. So that would be 1 is the deed restriction, 2 is this little piece of easement, 3 is the 2 acres, 4 is also access to this easement, and then the 5th part, of course, is the easement to Mr. Zappa. So going back to our list, we would have recreational opportunities, and we really think that there would be some great opportunities for some rustic remote camping on those 2 portions of the 2 acres that we would have. We see this also that easement that went to the east would provide a great opportunity for walk-in access for the residents of the Starwood Conservancy area to come to our new county park. Basically, Starwood already has at the bottom of that significant ravine a very nice trail system that was developed as part of the Conservancy area. We would merely have to add to it to provide walk-in access for them. And eventually there would also probably be walk-in access to that property owner to the east that did not continue to provide easement to Mr. Zappa. There are also the positive fact that right now, looking at that property, it's probably likely that they could have at least 3 lots there. And by selling us the 2 acres and selling us the deed restriction, we're reducing it to only 1 lot. That has less impact on the resource. It has less impact on our future county park and provides a much more positive impact overall for us in only having 1 additional property owner we're working with in the future. So I think that's a really positive. Here's a great picture that shows that bluff line just in the front. This is one of the parcels right near the edge of that 2 acres, right where we would come in and be sharing that joint access. So a little more explanation. The deed restriction, again, it would limit it, future development to 1 single residential home site. It would provide, the easement would provide access Starwood and other property owners to the east. And there is also, and it's the next item on your agenda, the proposal from Mr. Zappa that he would provide us with a $340,000 donation towards future park improvements at Eckert Blufflands County Park. Now, I would point out that in the contract to purchase, which was in your packet, there is item number 11 on page 3. And item number 11 says very clearly, seller understands that seller, that's Mr. Zappa, needs to obtain a conditional use permit pursuant to section of the ordinance and a variance in order to create lots 26 and outlot 4, which is shown also on the certified survey map, which was also in your packet. And those are basically the 2 different areas. The lot 26 or existing outlot 1 would have the deed restriction, and the outlot 4 or what we have a legal description for would be the 2 acres we would purchase. And he understands that even if such conditional use permit and variance are not granted, that such denial does not excuse performance of this contract. So in other words, we're going to go forward regardless with this acquisition and purchase, regardless of whether Mr. Zappa gets his permissions to build a house there or not. He's rolling the dice and taking a chance, but he's moving forward with this acquisition. In which case, if he doesn't get that, he has said that he's in his letter, which is in your packet, that he would perhaps not be donating the funding, and that's fine. But I think that there's a very good chance he will, and I don't know how the Board of Adjustment will rule. We've not really talked about that. I've made it clear to him that I would have no influence on the Board of Adjustment, and whatever happens, happens. And he's agreed and signed this contract saying he understands that and he has no expectation. So a couple more quick, oh, go ahead, ask a question.
Before you move on, as I read Mr. Zappa's seemingly, this isn't just I intend to donate. I'm seeing this as a conditional promise. It doesn't seem to me that if he gets his approval, I don't believe he has the right to not give us the 340,000.
You could be right.
I
don't-
see this
don't
as
know.
a commitment, but it's also not the most glorious language either.
No.
So why don't we potentially request that he be more forthright and term this in such a way as that it's less vague?
Okay.
Because, I mean, that's his end game, is he wants to be able to build his house on it.
Sure.
And if we don't get if he builds his house and we don't get the 340, we made a stupid mistake. And I'm reminded of our deal with the library, where we didn't have the best language going into it. This is not the best language.
Okay. Well, and that's totally up to you. We can certainly go back to Mr. Zappa and talk to him. But I would give you a couple more points for your consideration as you think about that. So this is the proposed certified survey map. It is only a draft. It has been submitted, for instance, to our department, but our department has done nothing on it because the same problem has been has existed for 20 years. Mr. Zappa has no access. Access is required before any kind of document like this can go forward before the Board of Adjustment or any other board, like a town board, et cetera, which he has to get approval from all different agencies. I will kind of jump over this for a minute. This is just a re-summary of a lot of what I've said about the great opportunities we have out there, and I still believe that the opportunities exist even on that 2 acres. I think it adds to the park. I think it does some positive things. And I'll give you a quick summary also. This is the $2 billion. We've done this every time we've brought a proposal before you for acquisition. These stars show the properties we've already purchased. The 2 in yellow, the one is the one that this board approved just last month. The Bishop property, which we've already closed on, and which will be transferred to the state of Wisconsin, Willow River State Park, and that's going to come up in the next month and a half. And it also shows that, you know, we've added on to our existing park, Homestead Parklands. We purchased that Richards property. We purchased the Eckert property. We purchased the trailhead that's part of our new St. Croix River Crossing Loop Trail. And we purchased 14 acres on Bass Lake, which is going to be a fabulous little niche park. So the last of our money is almost gone, but we have an odd amount left, $14,432. And in order to spend that appropriately, we're transferring it to the next fund, which is the Green Space Fund, which brings this number up. And just so you know, the reason we have this odd amount, it's not $400,014, is because the town of St. Joe also had a little tiny bit left over, and they transferred their little extra bit to us. So we've already purchased the Bishop property. As you might remember from last month, we purchased that for $75,000. The reason it's shown as slightly less is because we also got a credit for the 2018 or 19 taxes payable in 2020. So that's why that's different. We're showing that we would have about $340,000 that we would pay for Mr. Zappa's, the whole deal altogether, and that there would be roughly $5,000 closing cost. That's an estimate. So I know there was also a question about why so much money, and I would just add a couple of points of interest. So again, this was never really looked at as individual pieces. This was always a package deal, which is part of why we looked at this price. But I would point out that the Starwood subdivision, and I'm going to go back up so you can see that.
Alan,
I'll make it
let's
quick.
try to
Yeah,
move it
I'll
along here.
move it along,
All right,
sorry.
thank you.
But the Starwood subdivision also fronts on, just like our 2 acres and the property that would have the deed restriction, fronts on this big conservation easement. The conservation easement area also grants anyone who fronts on it access down to the St. Croix River. Those lots on this side are priced, just the land, not the houses, is worth $240,000 a piece approximately. So yes, they already have a road in front of them, and this does not. But I also know that when we look at this, I think for our $340,000, we're getting 2 acres, which is worth around $200,000, allowing for the road. We're getting a deed restriction, which limits future development, which is also worth a lot of money, and especially, I think, in terms of our county park. And we're getting 2 different easements, which improve access to our property. Yes, we are giving an easement, but I think overall, this is a very good deal. I don't think the county is losing money, and I think when you consider that Mr. Zappa has proposed, and perhaps not written it very well, but he has proposed, and it was his idea, not mine, that he would be donating county money to the county because it will benefit him to have a beautiful county park adjacent to his future property, future residence. And this is a spot where he has told me repeatedly, he intends to live himself. So I think that the price is not unreasonable. I think it's actually a very good deal for us. I think we're getting a lot of good things. So having worked with a variety of acquisitions, I think this is a great deal for St. Croix County. So I'll jump ahead and just give you one last thing to consider and keep this short.
I think we have a question, Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay, so one last point just to consider, as this top on this says, final mitigation funding acquisition, funds utilized by June of 2019. So this is the last of the funds we have in Town of St. Joe and the green space and all the money combined. And we have to use this money up by the end of June. And as it said in the contract to purchase, this would, our closing, regardless of what happens with Mr. Zappa's mission to get a lot out of it, we will be closing by June 28th. And he's aware of that and agreed to that. Again, it's in the contract, if not sooner. And the whole point of that is if we don't close, if we don't spend this money, the money goes back to the state of Minnesota. So, any questions? Mm-hmm.
So one of the points that I listened to was perhaps the Starwood development property, you know, where that conservation easement, do we, as part of Outlot 4, do we have access to the river at all?
I would suggest that yes, we would. We've looked at it, but I also know that as being a good neighbor, we already on our property, the Eckert property and the Richards property, we have significant access to the river already. If you look at this, we have access up here, we have access here. So to me, this would be more a consideration of the value of that land and that deed restriction and that access and that purchase that we're making.
The parties that control the conservation easement are, what are the two again?
The Homeowners Association and formerly West Wisconsin Land Trust. I believe they changed their name, and I don't have that at the tip of my tongue.
So are they both aware that we might be inadvertently getting access to the river through that whole conservation easement?
Yes. When I talked to the gentleman from West Wisconsin Land Trust, he said as far as he can see, this is just a win-win situation. I did not personally talk to the Homeowners Association. Mr. Zappa did. He's already a member of the Homeowners Association because this outlot is a member of the Homeowners Association. Any other questions?
Any other discussion?
Just one thing, I mean, what Councilman Schoberg said, can we change the agreement so that it's more specific that he will definitely do the money before the June 28th, or do you want to just go as is?
We have some parts to this, the closing pieces. We can ask him. I would certainly suggest we could ask him, but if we have to come back to another county board meeting for approval, then I need to at least have the first one approved, and I don't know that. I would have to defer to Mr. Cox to ask in greater detail.
I don't, what's the question?
Can we, yet tonight, somehow ask for a more...
Well, if someone I don't think you can contract to donate. That's
No,
the problem.
No, wait, I think you can. So it's not a donation, it's consideration. So that same letter, for good and valuable consideration, I agree that upon granting of my conditional use permit, I will donate $340,000. We have to add into his commitment the fact that we're relying on it. all right? So the whole 5-point deal is conditioned upon the fact that if he can build on that property, we get the $340,000.
I think that Mr. Zappa would agree to that. He, I mean,
Well,
I've been talking with him for months, and I do believe he would agree to that.
Then I'd like to make a motion to amend that Corporation Counsel and you, Ellen, approach Gary Zappa and offer language that would be more enforceable for the benefit of the county, so that if he gets his house, we get the money.
Would that mean we'd still move tonight on
We'd
this?
still move, and the approval is conditioned upon his meeting what would qualify in our Corporation Counsel's opinion as an enforceable agreement.
Second from.
Part of the issue, though, is that we're dealing with mitigation funds. And so then this is becoming essentially a contract for the county to recoup the mitigation funds. And I'm not sure that that meets the requirements of the program.
Well, I have run this by Dan Bauman, the regional director for Wisconsin DNR, explained it fully to him, and he completely supportive of it. I don't have it in writing, but, well, I should say I do have it in writing, that he's
He's
supportive of it.
completely in support of Mr. Schoberg's suggestion?
No, he's in support of what the current paperwork says. Sorry.
We can have him donate $339,000. I mean, fix it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask, how close to $340,000 is approximately?
It's as close as his donation heart wants it to be.
That word should be too. So my motion that was seconded is to tighten up his promise.
That's to amend that, correct? And it's open for discussion for the amendment. Supervisor Hanson.
That's just fine, as long as if he doesn't get the house, we still buy the land.
Yeah, is this more appropriate to be asking on the resolution accepting the donation? Or is it more, I'm just asking because he has already agreed to sell us the land regardless of whether he gets it. And that there's nothing about the donation in the contract to purchase. It's totally separate as a, per good legal advice.
Supervisor Miller.
If someone offers a donation, which is out of, as Councilman Cox said, out of the goodness of your heart, we should definitely not be going back to them and saying, we want you to word this better, so you will give it to us. Right now, we need to finish what we started here with the buying of the land. We need to make sure we don't alienate Mr. Zappa, so he turns on his recommended donation or his suggested donation. We are very appreciative of his donation, but I don't think that we should strong-arm someone or force their hand to say it needs to be worded better. I mean, this gentleman was kind enough to write a letter of any kind saying, I'd like to do this if all of my ducks get in a row. Thank you very much. But now we go back and say, we don't like how you worded your letter, so you're going to make sure you write it so you give us the money. Then say, forget it. And then all bets are off. So that's my opinion.
Okay.
Well, pardon me, he's getting a lot of value out of this. He's getting a piece of property that he can't build on at all because he has no access, and now he can have a dream home built on it. And he controls whether or not he pays us back some money if it's all successful for his plan. I'm tightening the agreement. I'm not changing it. I'm not strong-arming him. If Ellen said that he would probably be likely to be receptive to this, he gets his house, we get the money.
Okay. Supervisor Calder.
Yeah, I talked to him today. He called me, and I'd say that he'd be very receptive. He's anxious to do this. He's been trying to do this in other ways for a long time. And I agree with Supervisor Schoberg that we'd look pretty stupid, you know, if he got his deal and we didn't get the money.
Any other discussion? We have a motion and a second on the floor to amend.
I just would like to understand, would this
Supervisor
amend
Coulter.
the resolution to purchase it, that then we could not purchase, or would this amend the acceptance of the donation? The second resolution? Because right now it doesn't say anything about the donation in the resolution to purchase and sell or grant the easement.
You want a better letter?
Okay, I can get you a better letter for the second part. I'm just trying to.
I think we could keep them separate as long as the letter relates back to the deal. I just have to have an enforceable promise. It's not a donation. He's getting a buildable lot
That's
of
enough.
the deal.
If there's no more discussion, we have a motion and a second to amend. Yes?
But we don't have to amend it if we're voting on the purchase and not on the donation. Am I understanding that correctly? They're separate. Or what am I not getting?
You're correct.
So point of order, so what we're amending should be an amendment to the next agenda item?
So it's out of order to amend the resolution?
I think as I understood Supervisor Schoberg's original amendment, it was to amend the contractual agreement.
In the letter.
Well, the contractual agreement could have an additional clause added that ties in the letter, which the letter would be corrected and it would be incorporated by, or it'd be referred to in the contract. So that's where it came from.
Okay.
So it's a contractual commitment. Now, if that's not going to work for other reasons, such as the use of mitigation funds and queer the main deal, the purchase itself and the availability of those funds, then if that was your advice before, Corporation Council, then I'll vote against that amendment myself, and then we'll just act on this, on the second action. It's your call whether or not we should amend the contract as I had intended, or if it's better to amend the other, but still as enforceable.
I don't know that it makes a great deal of difference, other than my overriding concern is that we're using mitigation money to funnel back to the county under a contractual agreement.
Supervisor Coulter.
So what your fear is that we'd be laundering the money.
Can we strike that language?
You know,
Is that right?
we would be inappropriately using the money.
We have a motion to amend and a second to work on the language on the contract. So yes, vote will mean go forward.
One
and no
final
will mean-
comment, I urge my colleagues to vote against my amendment.
So we're going to vote it this time. That's all no's. So we'll go back to the original resolution with the motion and the second. Is there any President Hanson?
I have a question for Ellen. After listening to all of this and seeing how easily this can become convoluted, I'm looking at the mechanics of the interaction with Mr. Zappa, and I'm thinking about our staff and thinking about how our staff reports go when it comes to things in approving applications. And I'm worried, if he has so much writing on this, does that put our staff in a compromised position? And how are they, and how is that, what protections are there for them? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, and please forgive me. Could you speak to that?
Sure. We've been aware of that and cautious about that from the beginning. For instance, the staff, again, as I said, they have not moved. He has submitted his paperwork. They've given it the same review as always. I've made it very clear to the staff that there is no obligation for approval whatsoever, and it also I've made it very clear repeatedly, and Mr. Zappa's totally aware of it, that there is no influence going to happen whatsoever to the Board of Adjustment, and I do not believe that we put him in any kind of a compromising position. I haven't advocated for or against this. I've repeatedly told the staff this contract to purchase, and again, number 11 very clearly states we are going to go forward with this buying and selling regardless of whether he ever builds a house. So, and that's what we've made very clear, and we're going to make that happen. So I don't think that we are compromised, and again, as you noticed, 2 board members of the Board of Adjustment stepped out. They will make an independent decision on this, and they have not, we've had no conversation whatsoever with them on this, other than the earlier presentation to the Administration Committee.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Unless there's some serious discussion again, let's vote on it. Yeah, I hear you. Is it something?
Yeah, I want to make a different motion.
You want to what?
Okay, I want to make a different motion now, that we approve this sale, this purchase.
Wait a minute now. We already have that motion second
Right.
on the floor. I thought we had.
This is an amendment to that,
Okay.
that we amend our approval of that sale conditioned on receiving a different letter.
It's the same thing we just went through. Do I have a second? What? Do I have a second? Motion made and seconded to amend again.
Let me explain. Before, we were making a motion to amend the contract. This is making our approval of the contract conditioned upon this better letter.
Yep.
So we don't screw with the contract language at all, but our own approval of the purchase is contingent upon receipt of a stronger letter.
Okay.
But the stronger letter, you want to get that money. And that goes exactly back to what Council, you know, it's laundering again. I mean, you can't, that's the whole problem. If you change the letter to enforce the fact that we want to get that money back, then that is probably illegal in one way or another. It says it's money laundering. And also, if we wait to do the change, we may not get this done in June. Let's just vote on the first contract to purchase this. And then we can worry about the second thing, because I don't think we can combine the two because of what Mr. Cox, the reasons that you said it. Am I correct again? A rarity.
What would the letter say? That he's required to donate.
For good and valuable consideration upon which the county has relied, I agree to give $340,000 if I have a buildable lot.
I still share the concern about the appropriate use of the mitigation funds with that.
Okay.
But I cannot point, I mean, we're essentially using the money. It's a contract then to.
Do I get his second up there?
I don't see that as really different than the first proposal.
Okay, so we have another motion on the floor to amend the language on the contract. Yes, I'll mean pass it, no will be fail, so we're going to vote it this time. We're back to the original resolution and the motion in the second. I don't know if we need any more discussion, but I think at this time. Who made the second? Okay. So we're back to the original resolution, and I think we had enough discussion. We'll vote at this time on the original resolution that for the Eckerd Bluff County Park. So we're going to vote now. And I quit. Abstain. One no and the rest yeses, so it passes. So we'll move on to the next business item, which is the resolution to accept donation for further development of Eckerd Bluff land on the St. Croix River County Park. I have a motion. Motion by Supervisor Hanson. I have a second.
What number are we on? I don't even know what we're doing at this point. We're on 5?
Did we get the motion and the second up there?
Oh.
Supervisor Hanson.
Oh, okay. No, this is.
Motion.
Yes, this is. Okay. No amending. Okay.
Okay. So is there any discussion on this resolution? Any changes or modifications you want to make to it? Otherwise.
Yes, I move that it get cleaned up. Why is the word approximately in there? So we have approximately, and we have a letter that says.
It will get cleaned up as soon as I get exact closing costs, because it is specifically the $345,000 less the closing costs, and so that's why, and then I wrote approximately $340,000, and that's why.
Now, that is tying it directly to the contract.
Well, but not this letter. This letter just says approximately 340, not trying to know what the closing costs are.
On page 145.
We could certainly try to get
That's
a better
the
letter if you'd like. Absolutely not, no. I didn't have anything to do with the letter. I just I gave Mr. Zappa the contract, and the contract very specifically says approximately 340,000 or 45,000. Says it in there, so less closing costs. So it makes it very clear.
Corporation Counsel, you understand my concern. Do you offer any way of making this more enforceable for us, or at least less vague?
I have my computers. You have it? No. You have the resolution?
I can put the resolution on the screen if Cindy would.
I timed out on my computer.
Okay.
Right here.
You want a copy of the letter?
The letter.
Is it up on the screen? It's in the packet, it's on page
Yeah, I-
145, I think. Yes, page 145.
I'll get it back up. I didn't realize it was gonna be.
Losing everyone. Night, Robbie.
Good night.
See you next week.
Well, so your concern is that it could be $1 versus $340,000? You could say, I shall donate at least
There you go.
$339,000. And that would take care of any concern that closing costs were more than $5,000. That would be my constructive improvement to that.
Could we just have the resolution amended to say that, or do we need both a letter supporting it and the resolution?
Well, I think the resolution could be amended to say at least 339,000, and with the understanding that the letter be then amended to 339,000, at least 339,000.
Okay.
Do we need an amendment?
Supervisor Akhtarov.
Well, we can amend the resolution, but that doesn't mean we can change his letter. That's just what the county wants, but if he doesn't want to do it, he's under, we're giving him the money because we passed to purchase his land.
I didn't.
I know, you didn't know, but the board did. And so at this point, either you're going to trust him or you're not going to trust him, because we can't change his letter. We can ask him to change the letter, but we can't change it. We can change the resolution, but we can't enforce it because it's just a resolution. So I think we should just leave it be and hopefully not eat 340,000. But I don't know what we can do to enforce it if he doesn't want to change it, because we can't make him do anything. Nope.
Point well taken.
Any other discussion? Was there, I didn't hear a motion.
I guess I'm persuaded by Ms. Akhtarov's comments that.
Wow, that's a rarity.
Supervisor Miller?
I just want to ask a question. Why do we need a resolution to accept a donation when we don't even, Mr. Peavy? I guess I need clarification.
The
Why
county
do we?
board has to accept donations, and we
Well,
have a policy.
that's fine, but why don't we wait to get the donation before
We're trying to take
put the
care
cart
of.
before the horse?
No.
Because there's nothing that says he has to give us $5, because it is a donation, otherwise it is questionable activity. Right? But why do we need a resolution to accept a donation that we don't even have yet?
I think we're trying to act proactively in presenting, no, I don't think it's that we don't trust them. I think we're trying to just wrap it up with the, rather than having come back to the board. The board can certainly postpone this until such time that we have the money.
I would rather say
Or we
who's
have-
writing the thank you note instead of, honestly.
Supervisor Coulter?
I think we're assuring him that we're going to accept this donation and dedicate it toward the park, because he obviously has a selfish interest in seeing that park improved, perhaps. So I think that's what we're doing, and this is assurance to him that, so I don't see any problem with it.
Well, did we get Cindy, did we get a motion to amend?
We did not have a motion to amend.
We did not have a motion to amend, so we're just going with the regular resolution then, we've talked about it. It's either, there's a motion and a second on the floor for that, so with no more discussion, let's just vote on that then. What?
The original resolution.
Yeah, we'll vote it this time. I don't see anything wrong with it. Huh? Oh. That's all yeses, one abstain. That passes. We have one left for the evening, and that's resolution approving county administrator's goal report for a period.
Yeah, they're coming.
They'll be here. The period July 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2019. Do I have a motion to approve that? Supervisor Schoberg, motion. Do I have a second to that motion? Supervisor Peterson. Discussion on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This resolution comes in front of you and from the Administration Committee. A year ago in July, the board approved 3 goals based on the board's strategic plan. They were to establish a strategic plan for the Transit Commission, create a policy and process to prepare the county for the closing of Lincoln Hills Juvenile Correction Facility, and then thirdly, create a policy and establish best practices for the implementation of the Sheriff's Department body cameras. And in your packet, you have a report based on the progress that has been made towards the completion of those 3 goals. I won't go through the report for the sake of time. The Administration Committee took this up several hours ago and approved the resolution and is recommending it for the board's adoption. Are there any questions?
Any questions or discussion? If not, we have a motion and a second on the floor, so we'll vote at this time. That's all yeses. Thank you. Request for future agenda items. Anybody have anything? We don't?
Mr. Chairman?
Just get them to Pat or myself or Cindy. And we'll
Mr. Chairman, going back to the comment I made about the bonding issue, I would recommend that be a future agenda item and that we consider a meeting of the board sometime other than the next scheduled meeting, in other words, earlier, to consider that.
Okay. Any other? If not, county clerk's report? Nothing? Announcements? Nothing?
Mr. Chairman, just a very quick announcement. I know it's late. It'll take less than 20 seconds. We've had an absent seat over here in District 13 for a year and 3 months, 2 months. And I know it's been reported in the papers. This is the tie election up in New Richmond. And the Court of Appeals had ruled about a month ago or so. And as I understand it, the other party of the case, Mr. Shirley, has made a petition for review to the Supreme Court of Wisconsin. And their docket, they control what they accept, so it's called certiorari, or Wisconsin petition for review. And while they're considering it, our Board of Canvassers can't act. Mr. Cox, correct me if I'm wrong. And so that seat will remain open until the Supreme Court makes some kind of decision. Presumably, they'll take up the petition for review either in June, or if they don't take it up then they don't sit in July, they would take it up in August. Let's make an assumption they declined it, then the Board of Canvassers would act in somewhat quick fashion thereafter, and we would have a winner. If they accept it, then there would be full briefings of the case, argument, and decision process and a final decision, and that would likely take until at least the mid-fall of this year before the Supreme Court made a decision. That's just informational.
Thank you.
I would say if they take the case, that's very, very optimistic.
Okay. Any other announcements?
There's also about a 90% chance that they won't take the case, and we will be able to have someone sitting there. I'm not so sure Mr. Shirley got good counsel the way through this. His brief was lacking and pretty well thrown out by the Court of Appeals. But for some reason, he continues to appeal this. So it's too bad for those constituents.
Supervisor Motatum.
I'm just wondering if you're going to give us an update on District 14, the timeline for appointment.
Oh, yep, yep. Well, we have a date. What date is that they're due in?
Well, this will be, it'll come before the board in August.
August, right.
Right.
Do you have a date for when?
The deadline?
Yeah. What's the deadline?
I believe it was the 24th. I haven't sent
Yeah,
out the notice yet or published it yet. It's 2 months away, and I'll get it out. But
Okay, thank you.
And since we are having a July meeting, don't forget there's the county fair in July. So go to it.
Okay. Any other announcements? Thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.